Why do Indians want to have lighter skin, and is this a political topic? Let's find out together. Let's get into it.
गोरे गोरे मुखड़े पे काला काला चश्मा
ये क्या किया तुमने? तुमने तो अभी बच्चे को मार ही डाला था। इतना भयानक बच्चा।
Skin color. Something that has united us and divided us for millennia. It's one of the first things you see when you look at a person. It defines races, ethnicities, even individuals. While modern notions around race and ethnicity are just that, modern. Skin color is something that has always been relevant. Nowhere is that more true than in the Indian subcontinent. India is one of the cradles of humanity, a land of infinite diversity and thousands of years of traditions. People across the subcontinent look drastically different, but there's always been an idea of India since ancient times. Despite being in so many different colors, both outsiders and insiders recognize an idea of an Indian. Many Indians can tell you how diverse these colors are even in their family. The light-skinned brother, the dark-skinned sister, the generic brown dad and mom, all this is fairly common. But today, only one set of shades are really admired in India, light-skinned ones. And it's been like this for a while, but not always. For me, I've always been conscious of my skin color. I was light-skinned for Indians, but a bit too brown for Americans. More importantly though, was the day I noticed a snow-white splotch on my knee. It started to spread slowly but surely. I was then diagnosed with a condition called vitiligo, where my own immune system attacks the melanin in my skin. Each day I saw what made me Indian chip away. It's probably the reason why I'm so interested about India today. But anyways, enough about me. This is a tale about us. This is the story about a people who used to worship black gods, but ended up worshipping white men. This is the history of colorism in India. First, let's start off with some background. Why is India so diverse in terms of skin color? The obvious answer is size and geography. India is called a subcontinent for a reason. It has various biomes and climates, leading to people adapting in different ways, skin color included. But we also have to recognize something else. We have to talk about the peopling of India, or the various groups that migrated into India and mixed and made all these different groups, well, Indian. Now this happens everywhere across the world, especially in ancient times. Migration is a norm in human history. Various different ethnicities and tribes and groups would migrate in and out of regions. This is, again, super normal. Only in India is this type of stuff politicized to this degree. And we'll talk about why later in the video. The reason I'm bringing it up now though is because it's important to understand these variations in skin color. To put it briefly, India has about 4 or 5 different groups, you could say, that have migrated into India and mixed to make Indians. Pretty much all Indians are a mix of the first 3, and some have the 4th and 5th group. The first group we're talking about is the ancient ancestral South Indians. Now I'm saying South Indian, but that's kind of a misnomer here. It's not necessarily the best way to describe it, but that's what scientists describe it as. All Indians have this AASI DNA in them. These are some of the first migrants out of Africa who arrived probably around 60 to 70,000 years ago, give or take, and they are the main source of our darker skin. Next are migrants from around Iran. These people came from around 10,000 to 9,000 years ago. They were probably a lighter shade of brown than the AASI people who already were in India, and these groups started to mix, and that's how the Indus Valley civilization came about. Then comes people from the steppe, and this was kind of a continuous trickle migration from probably around 4,000 years ago, maybe a bit later. But these people came from Central Asia and had probably the lightest brown skin, we could say. They came in waves and they integrated with the local population. Now, combine all these 3 groups and you start getting cultures like the Vedic culture. And keep in mind, this history is still kind of contested, it's still kind of shifting, there's multiple theories, so maybe some groups came earlier, some groups came later, but the point of this video we're talking about is this mix of skin colors, so just keep that in mind. Anyways, all three of these groups are in almost every single Indian, I'd say. Probably 95% plus, if not even more. We are a mix. And I just want to emphasize, every Indian is indigenous because of this. When it comes to the ancient beliefs of these people, they worshipped Indian land. They worshipped Indian gods, Indian flora, Indian fauna. Their holy sites are in India. This is what indigenous means. So just, again, keep this in mind. We are all a mix. We're just of different ratios, which usually varies around region or caste. And we'll talk about this later too. Just trust me. Let's keep going. In terms of the last two groups, one is the Austroasiatic people who came from Southeast Asia probably around 4,000 to 3,000 years ago. And these people have a lot of impact on tribal populations. So you may have heard of something called Adivasi. Again, this is like a misnomer. Like, everyone is Adivasi. Everyone has a mix of some groups that came earlier, some groups that came later. So this term is kind of BS, to be honest. And then around the same time, and definitely a bit after, we had some people coming from the Tibetan plateau. That's how we see some Indians with some more East Asian features. These two groups definitely contribute to that. Combine all 5 of these groups and you get crazy diversity, especially in terms of skin color. And this mix of lineages, even within a single Indian family, kind of explains why you see so much variation within families. I know some of you guys have made fun of your dark brother or sister, so you can't get away from that here. We're going to talk about that. But enough biology and basically prehistoric history. What did ancient Indians themselves think about skin color? We first start with the Vedas. Now, most people will probably start talking about Varna or how it's equivalent to color or something like that, but this is kind of a stretch. This is kind of like another politicization that we're talking about here. It's not exactly how it was. Varna is an ancient word for caste. Now, in some commentaries, you will see some colors associated with, say, white for Brahmins, red for Kshatriyas, yellow for Vaishyas, and black for Shudras. And while you can say maybe this holds up to skin color, you'll start to understand why it does not as we start going through the scriptures. Color in the Vedas is a very special thing. It is used primarily for symbolism, and sometimes people kind of misinterpret this. So you'll hear things like, oh, people have golden hair or shining red hair, then golden eyes, golden skin, shining bright white. And this is mostly to do with metaphors for the sun or fire, or generally describing like a fiery or sun-like aspect to people. Keep in mind, we have geographic descriptors of the Vedas, and this is all in India, and there's not that many blonde people in India as I know so far. There's also symbolism in terms of white being a color of purity or newness or hope, and then black being a color of darkness and ignorance and evil. Now, sometimes people transpose these into, say, ethnic groups or something, but...
Oh, before he continues, yeah, so even in Japan, I think they associate white with like a superior class or whatever, lordship, what have you. And also here, I think that the people in Slovakia that had whiter skin were the rulers, because they never went into the sun. And those people that went into the sun, they had kala, and with the dark skin. I think it's I don't know if you guys know about Joseph Conrad. He had written a book called Heart of the Darkness. It was it's not really about the skin color, but it's when you're seeing in our 3D reality, it's like a natural human association that you associate it with something darker, and since bad things happen in the dark, go figure. I think that's nothing to judge people about. It's something that people should be aware about in order not to have prejudices. But at the same time, I feel like it's that instinct that we are drawn to light. And the light for us, usually, I don't know how it is about you guys, but at least in the West, the white represents, or light represents, the good things. So, yeah.
Let's keep going and you'll see that doesn't really hold up. Surprisingly enough, in the early Vedas, we don't see that much commentary on skin color like that. What do I mean by that? Now let's go to the Upanishads, which is the end of the Vedas. The Upanishads are very difficult to date, but we could say most of them, if not all.
Okay, one thing, I thought it was called Upanishads. Why is he saying Upanishads? I really want to know, because now I feel like I've been saying that all wrong the entire time.
all are probably pre-Buddhist, so at least 700 BC plus. Earlier than that, maybe going into the thousands, maybe earlier. That's not the point of this video. We're talking about skin and not like a Neutrogena commercial or anything. Although if you have a good skincare routine, comment in the description below. I really need to know as well. Anyways, the Upanishads are important because they describe skin color in a lot of detail and for very specific purposes, and they give us some inferences. They tell us about the culture that we are researching right now. They tell us about how early Indians thought. Now I'm going to give you 3 very important verses, and this is in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. The first one is, if one wishes to have a fair-skinned son who can master one Veda and have a full life, the mantra recommends rice with milk and ghee. The second verse describes if one wishes to have a brown or tawny son who will master 2 Vedas and have a full life. The mantra recommends rice with yogurt and ghee. The last one, and the most important verse, describes if one wishes to have a dark-skinned son.
Can I just say, what a cute baby. I don't know, this is the CGI generated, but isn't this adorable? So cute, so cute.
With copper eyes, who will master 3 Vedas and live a full life. This mantra recommends rice cooked in water, eaten with ghee. Now, do you get what just happened here? This is going to be the crux of the entire video. The verses are in ascending order of merit or austerity required to get a child. Now, this last child, the dark-skinned one with coppery eyes, it's kind of a weird description, isn't it? He's a special one. But why this emphasis on this skin color? Why is it so special? And does that mean that the Vedic people actually preferred a dark-skinned son or dark skin itself? Now is when our journey really begins. This verse is a reference to Lord Vishnu. The description of him having dark skin and red or coppery eyes, probably some type of, lighter brown eyes, that is considered the ultimate blessing. Dark skin was not a shame, it was a gift in Vedic India. Ancient Indians revered dark skin.
So do you guys know about that? That it was a blessing in the old times? I'd love to know.
Kali, Vishnu, Vaman, Ram, Krishna. All these gods are described as very beautiful, and the scriptures have super vivid descriptions of their dark skin. One description you'll frequently hear is Mega Shamam, which references a dark thundercloud ready to burst with rain. You'll find this in the Ramayana, in the Bhagavatam, in the Vishnu Puran, in the Mahabharata, and various other scriptures. A big source for this video is the book Black Avatar by Amit Majmudar. This is an awesome book. It's in the description. Go ahead and buy it. But in this book, Amit actually describes something he calls the 3 Krishnas in the Mahabharata. Firstly, there's a Krishna of divinity, Lord Krishna, the avatar of Vishnu. The Krishna of beauty, or Krishna, is Draupadi, the wife of the Pandavas. She was very dark-skinned and considered probably the most beautiful woman in the entire epic. Hence the name Krishna. Krishna, in this sense, means black or dark-skinned. Lastly is the Krishna of wisdom, Maharishi Ved Vyas, whose original name is Krishna Dvaipayana. Dvaipayana because he was born on an island, and Krishna because he was very dark-skinned. Again, also an avatar of Vishnu. At this point, you can kind of see that stigma around dark skin is not an ancient Indian thing. Ancient Indians actually liked all skin tones. Shiva and Parvati are noted for their very light or white skin, white as camphor, a type of mineral that's very white. Balaram, frequently paired with Krishna, is also light-skinned. Now this is kind of a theme. We see this with Vishnu and his great devotee Shesha, or this white, multi-headed great cobra. We'll see this with the sages, Nar being light-skinned and Narayan being dark-skinned. We see this with Lakshman being light-skinned and Ram being dark-skinned. It's kind of a beautiful juxtaposition or dichotomy that we see in Hindu theology, where we have this light-skinned devotee and dark-skinned god. Of course, we have these goddesses like Radha, Sita, or Lakshmi, who are also described as golden skinned. Same thing with Lord Buddha, who's described as very golden hued. And there's sometimes variations between descriptions, especially with the gold and the fair skinned people, but the dark skinned people are very prominently dark skinned. My point is, ancient India had a unique acceptance around almost all skin tones. I'm sure there was some, internal variance between certain regions and areas and groups and time, but overall we see in these scriptures a wide acceptance of different skin colors. That's unique. that's different from India today. Nowhere can we see this better than the caves of Ajanta. The earliest carvings date around to around the 2nd century BC and were primarily used by Buddhist monks and sometimes traders or travelers as a place of refuge or a monastery. Over the next hundreds of years, you'd see scenes of Buddha's life, as well as contemporary India, be painted along the walls in these amazing murals. Something that immediately jumps out when you look at these paintings, these earliest depictions of Indians in terms of paint, is dark skin. There's a lot of people who are dark-skinned. And the artists had a wide array of pigments they could choose from minerals or plants or other types of earthen products, and you can kind of see this across the paintings as well. There are light-skin depictions, there are dark-skin depictions, there's everything in between. So you see a whole range, but you see a lot of dark skin. And look, Indians are primarily dark-skinned, especially around that area in Maharashtra. So they were painting themselves as they were. They chose to go black, but eventually they did kind of go back. But we'll discuss that in a little bit. Ajanta is the most famous, but we also see similar depictions in the Ellora caves in Maharashtra, the Bagh caves in Madhya Pradesh, the Sita Navasal cave in Tamil Nadu. All these date to around the 5th or the 7th century AD, and they're in different parts of India. So we could kind of see a snapshot of how Indians viewed themselves. So what exactly changed? Well, most people skip around 1,000 years at this point, if not more, and go directly to British colonialism. But we're going to be a bit naughty. We're going to wade into controversy and something we're not supposed to talk about. We're going to discuss the truth. In 711 AD, we see the first Islamic invasions into India, and that is the Arab invasion of Sindh. Now, this isn't that significant territory-wise. The Arabs would be promptly stopped thereafter, and their expansion into India would kind of be mute. We wouldn't see further invasions from Muslims until much later. The reason I bring up the Arab invasion though, is this is kind of the first interaction of the Islamic world with the Indian world. We'd start to see Arab merchants and travelers going into India more so. You'd see this in Arab writing about Indians in kind of a backhanded compliment type of way, even though they were pretty effusive in terms of praise early on. What do I mean by this? Well, early Arab visitors or merchants or traders would praise Indians for their wisdom and their knowledge, but they were kind of surprised that these people were so dark-skinned and knowledgeable. Remember, Arabs practiced a slave trade that was connected to Africa, so they kind of had a negative connotation when it came to dark skin. And to be fair, people in the ancient world did have stigmas around skin color. India may have been a bit exceptional here, but other regions did seem to have this type of stigma. And, you know, it's the ancient world. We don't need to be PC here. They believe what they believe. And that was then. But again, the reason I bring this up is because since Arab culture was the pinnacle of Islamic culture, this dark skin stigma would start to spread or reinforce in some cases. And reinforcement is probably the more important way to describe it when it comes to India. That is because this skin color stigma, this association with dark skin being bad, this spread more so because of the Turkic invasions into India. Around the 10th century AD is when we'd see some of the first most prominent ones with Mahmud of Ghazni. Now, he would come down and sack Somnath multiple times, as well as other areas in India, but he wouldn't really make that much of a base in India. It'd be a bit more temporary. Same thing with a few later invaders, until the Delhi Sultanate and eventually the Mughal Empire. Now, these Central Asian Turks themselves would be light-skinned, but they also had another cultural attachment to them. They were attached to Persian culture, and in Persian culture, light skin is a huge thing. That is a beauty standard. So they combine all of these sources of dark skin stigma, whether it's the Arab Islamic one or the Central Asian Turk one or the Iranian Persian one, and they would despise dark skin. They despised these Hindus and these Indians that they would conquer. They thought dark skin was ugly. And this is where we see kind of a slow motion cultural imposition start happening within India, especially the areas that they conquered. Add to the fact that a new slave trade also opened up. Dark-skinned Indians would be carried off into Central Asia and other parts of the Islamic world for slave work. Arabs associated dark skin with slavery due to the connection with Africa. Now it was the turn of Turks and Persians to associate more sun skin with slavery. Even the beloved poet Rumi, who isn't just popular today but was also popular back then, he had a lot of poetry criticizing dark skin and associating the word Hindu with slavery or dark skin or arrogance or ignorance and all these very negative connotations. This combination, Hindu, dark skin, slavery. That is what the Islamic world started to think of Hindus. It went away from this earlier Arab idea of men of wisdom to becoming men of slavery. Rumi wrote Persian poetry, and Persian was the lingua franca of the Indian Muslim elites. So you start to see this dark skin stigma spreading not only across the Islamic world in the West, but also within India in the East. And this also started to rub off onto Hindu elites who were working with these Muslim kingdoms. When you start to see art coming out of Islamic India, you notice that skin is starting to get a lot lighter. The dark-skinned people are being dropped. They're absent. They just stop existing in many cases. And again, this would leak into Hindu artists as well. They were part of the same elite culture in many cases, so they would be patronized to paint light skin. And this is how Indians started to see themselves a bit differently. This is when the shame starts kicking in. But beyond art, we have to start looking at the real world as well. How did the Delhi Sultanate organize their empire, and what kind of hierarchy did they do? When it comes to their upper echelons, the historian Minhaju Siraj notes that the nobles and servants of the state were all Turks of pure origin and Tajiks of good stock. Even converted Indian Muslims would face a banyan ceiling in the Delhi Sultanate's administration simply because of their ancestry, simply because of their skin color. Even later Muslim empires like the Mughals or the Bahmanis would import Turks or Persians or just Muslims from the West into their administration, as they highly valued these people simply because of their lineage, because they were not Indian, because they were light-skinned. Now think of the social effect of this. All the people at the top are light-skinned, and all of the people below them are progressively getting darker and darker and darker. What does this do to a person's psychology? What does this do to a society's psychology when they see this? This foreign elite idea of lighter skin being better starts to percolate across India over these hundreds of years of Islamic rule. However, we have evidence that this obsession is not that widespread, and that's because Islamic empires didn't conquer all of India. Marco Polo, a famous medieval European traveler, actually traveled up and down the west coast of India, from Kerala to Maharashtra to Gujarat. Something he noticed and was kind of perplexed by was that the people liked dark skin. They tried to get darker skin, and their gods were black, as he described it. On the other hand, they saw white skin as kind of like a devilish quality, while dark skin was seen as a godly quality. And even when you zoom out during this time period, this was the age of the Bhakti movement. And who were some of the biggest gods that this movement was centered around? Of course, Ram, Krishna, and Vishnu, the Dark Lords of India. An explosion of poetry came out praising Ram and Krishna's thundercloud dark skin that was reminiscent of a blue lotus or deep blue ocean. The iconic dark blue skin starts to arise here. Now, on one hand, this might be because attitudes started to shift around really dark skin and people didn't like it. That definitely might be true, but the symbolic angle is also here. Either way, one can kind of see this as a societal pushback against this new beauty ideal, the embrace of dark skin over this new imposition of light skin. But anyways, back to the Europeans. Marco Polo was only one of many European travelers and explorers, missionaries, and merchants who started to trickle into India at this point. Over 1,000 years earlier, the Greeks came to conquer India, but they couldn't really cut it. Rather, it was time for trade, both in goods as well as information. In terms of descriptions of how they looked, they said the North Indians looked like Egyptians and the South Indians looked like Ethiopians. They just didn't have woolly hair. Their words, not mine. And this early European contact with these Greeks and even some Romans was fairly positive because of this exchange of ideas as well as riches. But as time went on, and especially after the Middle Ages and into the age of exploration and colonialism, things started to change. While India's Turkic conquerors were into light skin, Europeans were another level. Much more concrete ideas began to emerge around the ideas of race and the differences between people. Some of the earliest of this rhetoric that we hear is actually from the Portuguese. We have a lot of accounts of Portuguese rule in places like Goa, and especially of the Inquisition, when locals were forced to convert to Christianity, as well as the descriptions of these locals. Francis Xavier, a missionary who advocated for this brutal Inquisition, notes how he detested the blackness of the Hindus, and he kind of gloated about their black idols being destroyed. This guy probably has around over 100 institutes and schools named after him in India today. Now, while the British didn't really have as much religious motivation when they came to India, it was mostly commercial and trade and eventually conquest, they shared the disdain for dark skin with the Portuguese. And again, I don't want to judge people based on modern standards. People back then were racist, like, let's be honest. but I do want to give you the context of how these European colonialists came to India and how they viewed Indians, especially them being considered less than because of their dark skin. Think of how often you hear the word fair in English literature as a sign of beauty. Now, other global literature also has descriptions about maybe light skin being better or a certain skin being better, whatever, but this almost single-minded obsession within British literature about fair being good gives us a clue into the mentality of a lot of these colonialists. And as the British conquered India after commercializing it, colonialism came into full effect. Not only were Indian markets and industries destroyed by the parasitic effect of colonialism, but also Indian self-conception. The East India Company and the British Crown ran British India with a network of Indians. These Indians would work under British officers and imbibe British values. This idea of dark skin being bad, again, we have another set of elite Indians imbibing this after the earlier Islamic empires, and elite attitudes eventually rain down. There is a trickle-down effect here in terms of culture. So this is how we start seeing a greater and greater idea of dark skin being bad. Another aspect you have to consider is the British obsession with race and anthropology, and how it would be integrated when it came to studying India. The British were a very detail-oriented people and super systematic. Whether used for good or bad, this is what the British were, and they were super efficient when it came to this. This meant they would start noticing details in people that even the people may not notice. The British recorded the differences of skin color between castes, the differences in their demeanor, the differences in how they carried their life. And they would craft theories such as the martial race theory or the Aryan invasion theory. Remember those migrations I described earlier in the video? Those types of migrations, again, they happen all across the world. But now we started to see a politicization of it and a racialization of it from the British. And it is true that castes kind of are distinct ethnic groups, even in terms of their genetics. But while they have differing ratios, they all come from the same sources in most cases. Not just that, but this isn't all that salient. You can't necessarily tell someone's caste by their skin color or vice versa. Maybe you could tell what region they're from, and even then it's kind of difficult at times. Nonetheless, this type of racialization has really caught on in certain parts of India, especially a place like Tamil Nadu with the Dravidian movement. Even nowadays, there's these ideas about indigeneity, where certain castes are more indigenous than others, and measuring like genetic percentages and stuff like that, and this type of stuff is almost always just used for hatred. Let's just be honest, that's what it is. This probably isn't the best path for Indians to go on, dividing themselves by color and genetics and race and whatever group mix you are. I don't think it's good, but that's personally just me. Either way, back to the British. Thomas Macaulay, a leader in the British administration of India, created this brown Englishman concept, where he wanted to craft a group of Indians who were Indian in blood and color, but English in tastes, opinions, morals, and intellect. The British not only physically conquered and destroyed India, they also did it mentally. They picked apart Indian institutions and replaced them with their own. Will Durant, possibly the most accomplished American historian ever, notes that when the British came, there was throughout India a system of communal schools managed by village communities. The agents of the East India Company destroyed these village communities and took no steps to replace the schools. Even today, after the century of effort to restore them, they stand at 66% of their original number 100 years ago. There are now 730,000 villages and only 162,015 primary schools. Only 7% of the boys and 1.5% of the girls receive schooling, i.e. 4% of the whole. Such schools as the government has established are not free, but exact a tuition fee, which, though small to a Western purse, looms large to a family always hovering on the edge of starvation. Mass Indian education basically ceased while elite Indian education was controlled by the British. As elite Indians began to consume more British education and literature and ideas, Macaulay's words came true. We started to see brown Englishmen. But later, many of these brown Englishmen would rebel and fight for freedom. However, their biases remained. All these ideas about Indian inferiority and shame would stay in these people despite fighting for freedom. There was a sense of deep shame here. A shame around Indian religion, culture, values, and indeed, skin color. As the Indian Republic was born and India became one, these elite ideas would now start to supercharge and accelerate across all of India. Many of the first producers of early Bollywood actually came from northwest India, a lot of Punjabis especially. And most of these people were light-skinned and or into this brown Englishman type of concept. An obsessive amount of effort actually went into making these light-skinned Indians even more lighter with, say, lighting or makeup. This standard of beauty would then spread across India as Indians went and still do kind of go crazy for films. But a consequence of this is that the Indian masses actually started to hate themselves and their skin color. They didn't look like the people on screen, and this isn't just about facial features or anything. This is about, again, their skin color. One interesting manifestation of this in the Republic of India's history is secessionism. Separatist movements in places like Kashmir, Punjab, or Northeast India, a lot of their foundational thought about why they are separate is related to their light skin, their whiteness. While they'll speak about freedom and human rights in the English language, when they switch to local, a lot of it is just talking crap about Indians because they're dark skinned and how much better they are than other Indians because of their lighter skin. The colorism and ethnic supremacy angle of these separatist movements is integral. It is foundational. Their separatism ultimately rests on the fact that they don't like being considered Indian. They don't like dark skin. Now, attitudes around skin color still persist in India, even though I do think it's gotten better today than in the past. Images of gods and goddesses, especially in terms of acting roles, rarely feature this type of dark skin that's described in the past, this mega shaman. We usually see actors with lighter or wheatish tones at most. I think this is starting to change though. India is undergoing a massive transformation in how it views itself. It's self-conception, as we talked about. There's an idea of India throwing away this 1,000 years of humiliation or shame or slavery and embracing what it actually is, embracing its ancient roots and embracing its indigeneity. There's a pride in being Indian that's different than it was in the recent past. Some may call it nationalism, some may call it patriotism, some may call it indigenous rights. Whatever you want to call it, Indians are changing how they view themselves, and it's mostly in a positive direction. Indians are beginning to look themselves in the mirror and not look away in shame, rather embracing who and what they are. This is a new India on the horizon, and it's filled with new Indians. Proud, unapologetic, and aspiring. And honestly, I don't think this change is simply skin deep. And like I told you before, once you go black, you don't go back. Thanks everyone for watching. This is Akshar from The Emissary.
Acha. I came across this video quite randomly, and I was like, I want to watch this. I want to see what this is all about. And because I have, I told you guys that I used to do a lot of TV production, and in whole Asia, I felt like people were going crazy for white skin. And there was like, one of the companies that I worked, and one of my clients, they were producing skin whitening products. And I was like, what is this about? I've never, you know, it, I don't know, maybe good 10 years ago now. And I was like, what is this about? Why are people trying to bleach their skin? I was like, this is mental and crazy. And I was like, I want to watch a video on this. I want to see what this is about. And I don't know how you guys felt, but I felt like this was a really good video. Really, it connected history and everything that's going on, and it made things at least make sense for me. I think where my biggest question, before I even dive deeper into the points I've taken down, is that I've heard, and there's a video of a Slovak girl married an Indian guy, and she expressed in that interview that she thinks it's super crazy that Indians are racist towards Indians due to the skin color. She cannot comprehend. And I do recommend you guys to watch that, because she's quite an okay representative of, I think, Slovakia in terms of how I feel like Slovak people think. And you know, when I see people caring so much about what the West thinks, and, you know, like putting on narratives to people's heads that actually do not exist in the West, but you guys think they do. She expresses there exactly also like how I feel. I mean, like, we don't care. I mean, in Slovakia. So I would recommend you to watch that. So I would love to know I mean, why is that still persisting in today's India society, when though he said that it's improving? I'd love to know what's happening, because the lady also mentioned in that interview that their kids, they're committing suicide because they just have skin color. And I guess none of us, you can't blame yourself, like for the continent culture you were born in. And I feel like people should just accept where they're from. I mean, I wouldn't want to be anybody else. Like, I'm a kind of a person that hates any kind of dress ups and stuff. I'm like, why would I want to go with someone else? Like, I'm me and I'm happy to be me. And I get from a psychological point of view as what he has explained. But still, I mean, man, just, like personally, I come from perhaps one of the most irrelevant countries on the planet Earth, right? Like, the fuck do I care who anyone thinks about me? I don't care. Do they pay my bills? If they don't, I don't care. I don't care what you think about me. So it just surprises me that, because there are so many beautiful, like, Black women, brown women, Asian women, like, more like we're talking Korean, Japanese, like, beauty is everywhere. It's just and as they say, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And I think that, like, let's say you're not feeling comfortable within your own culture, that's fine. But I think that you have to, in order to love yourself and be optimally functioning human being that is nice to other people, for the most of the part, because we're not, none of us, all of the time. And even if we are, it's fake. So sometimes, just accept who you are, where you come from, and love yourself. I don't know what else to tell people, because the beauty is in, as I said, in the eyes of the beholder. And why would you put yourself down for where you were born, and what's your skin color? Like, we've seen in that video that throughout the history, yes, some people consider black bad and some consider white bad. It just goes either way. So I mean, it's a silly way of looking at things, I personally believe. But because I do believe that we're all one and we're all connected. So different skin color, I don't think it does much. I think that people are more afraid of different cultures and how people have different values. So it's crazy, and I never realized, and maybe this video will be controversial, I don't know. Sometimes I shoot videos and people go crazy, and I have no idea what just happened. So how it became politicized, it's crazy that there are people segregating each other within India regarding the skin color. Like, I feel like we've moved from this world, but I would love to know what you guys think about it and where this is still coming from. And what surprises me the most? It surprises me and doesn't surprise me, I guess. Surprises me that Hinduism, right? Like, you have that rich tradition. But what perhaps when I say it doesn't surprise me is what they also mentioned in that video is about the educational system. And that was pretty much destroyed over there. And the more I've been on this journey with you guys for so long, and the more I'm actually looking into things, many things start clicking. And I never really understood the importance, I think, of education until I'm reviewing all these videos. And you guys made me read, or like I bought a lot of books about ancient Slavic history, so I understand what has happened there. But if your education is suppressed, it's just basically, it's like a cultural genocide. So the Slovaks have been really suppressed. I think 18 something, like in the 19th century, there were these national evolutions. And I think that this is why British were also doing, and that's just a wild guess, okay? Just don't quote me on that, but that's how it's connecting in my head. Okay, that's just all that I'm saying. Because when we go back to the video and he was showing all these different people, they were comparing them. And I think that back in the day, they were trying to justify their privilege. You know, and I said white people perhaps privileged, right? Because of the skin color, because they were able to achieve those amazing feats, like going around and enslaving people. Like sometimes you wonder, right? Like, I don't know what you guys, every time I wonder, like, I would love to spend a day or two in that episode, like with time travel. I just like to jump to a different timeline and see how the people actually thought. What were their problems and what was accepted, like how they, you know, because it's also an evolution of humanity. And, you know, you can only, I guess, judge history, judging looking at it backwards. But those people didn't really, I believe, didn't think that they were doing anything wrong. So it just fascinates me as to what were the standards and how our standards, and it's beautiful to see like how our standards for good, bad, morality are evolving over over the centuries. Who knows what will happen after us? I guess a flood, we always say in Slovak. But it just fascinates me. And going back to the culture, Slovaks were very, like, as the rise of the 19th century in Europe, nationalism, people were trying to justify their existence. So I've been recently reading a lot of, I'll show you, I have one book here. I think I've read some, maybe 3 or 4 already, on a history of kind of Slavic people that are, it just does read just like, what is it? Like the undisclosed Slavic people of first centuries, because even the guy had mentioned the migration theory, and a lot of the books that I'm reading currently are basically saying that the migration theory in general does not seem plausible, and the history needs to be rewritten, is at least the one that we are taught at schools. But, and that's the thing, like when someone eradicates your educational system, so this is what Hungarians were doing to Slovaks. They were literally they were kicking people out of the colleges just for, like, you couldn't speak Slovak. This is what was happening here by Hungarians. So for all of you that love Hungarians and you think Orban is amazing, think twice, because I know. They had manipulated history. They had, you know, like if people took a picture and signed their like something said there in Slovak, they were kicked out of school. So there was a constant like liquidation. And this is, I think during that book, I realized like how critical it is to really push the right education, or the education that is following your traditions. And obviously they were shooting us and all that kind of jazz. They, you know, like, or people were like, imagine that you build your house and you're living and you're doing all right, and suddenly they're going to come and genocide you, so you run, right? And a lot of things are lost, and that's, I guess, what British has done to you guys, which is horrible. And I think it does take decades to recover, not decades, perhaps centuries to recover from anything else, and just being able to really understand how important it is. You know, I feel like the tradition, some people are too stuck on them, and I think that you should respect the roots, but you should also adapt to what's happening, because the reason why we survive is because we are able to adapt. And but education is super critical. And imagine, like, they, you know, for example, Slovakia is a lot less people, obviously, like India. But you try to genocide people, you actually will succeed, and then the civilization is going to perish. And fun fact, these days, Hungarians are basically Slavic people, and it's a DNA proved. So education, and it's shitty when someone is, I guess, telling you that you're perhaps not smart enough because of the skin color, which is ridiculous. But I guess that was at the times where certain things were thought, you know, people like, I don't know, during the Rumi's days, I guess, you know, they didn't have maybe the science the way we have it, and they didn't have the world understanding, I guess, the way we do right now. So it's quite crazy. And what did I say? What did I write again? I can't even read after myself anymore. I just basically, it is just really surprising for me that the same skin color is politicized and people, yeah, kill themselves because of that. And yeah, I was like, I don't think I've ever tracked that people coming to South India were actually from Africa. Somehow it didn't connect. So yeah. Yeah, I just have the yeah, and back in the day, your dark skin was considered godly, right? And not anything to be ashamed of. But you know, we've talked about you know, the Sabbath that never left or whatever. That was like a year ago. And now I think that this video has given me a bit more context as to how, like, I guess you might perceive that. I'm not claiming I know it. I'm just saying I think I'm starting to put some pieces together in my head, because yes, through culture, you're through language, you're also able to influence the culture. And for what it's worth, like, you know, every culture has their perhaps better things and not so amazing things. And you know, I lived in the UK for so long, and I appreciated politeness. Although, you know, some people would call it fake, I think that this is a misunderstanding, because it's just it's just like a figure of speech, or things that they do that they culturally understand between one another. And you know, like, I think it's always nicer to be nicer to people, even if it's maybe not always super sincere. But you know, that's the way how they develop their culture and keep the social discord that way. And I feel like what I'm seeing in India also a lot, and I don't think people realize, I talked about it before, again, is the culture. I don't think that people fully get the cultural differences and how they shape the way you think and you view the world. And that's something I think everyone should be aware of, because it is to a large extent. So you know, with India, I'm realizing more and more, like, I keep on mentioning that that's different world. Because, for example, you can speak English, but if you speak English with the Indian mindset, is not, you know, people will not be understanding the same thing, right? Obviously, everyone can have, like, when you're learning foreign language, you can have a different concept of that foreign language, and when you start, you're translating from your own language. But you know, there is this interesting thing for work where what people what British say and what they mean. So basically, let's say if an English person tells you this is not bad, they actually think it's very good. And I, as a person from Central Europe, would understand, like, oh, this is actually shit. That is not, you know. Or like, if someone say, if this is an interesting suggestion, and they are actually native, they think that you've completely lost your mind and don't talk to me about this again, right? But you had learned English and you don't know the culture, you haven't lived there. You would think, oh, this is interesting. This is good, because interesting is a positive word. Or some people in the comments, sometimes I say in the comments, like, I don't know this, I'm afraid. And they're, why are you afraid? I'm like, come on, you know, like, this is a figure of speech. Do I really need to explain that to you? But I understand we all have different commands of language. I guess what I'm trying to show is just how deeply, if you don't understand the culture and if you're just learning the language, deeply, deeply think and go when it comes to misunderstanding of, you know, each other. And I think that's a shame. That's to a detriment of good human relationships. And because I think that perhaps we would not want to like to see others as that different from us. So we assume, you know, you're cool, yeah, we're friends, blah, blah, blah. But no, the cultural element is there. It's definitely there. And if you're in different culture long enough, I think you'll start spotting it if you're actually even conscious about. So yeah, I think that's it for today's video. I feel like I kept on blabbing forever. So I thank you guys for watching this video with me. If you did enjoy, you know what to do. Hit a thumb, so hit a like, hit the subscribe button, hit that bell notification icon, and I will see you next one. Until then, please do take care. I'm sending lots of love. Bye-bye.